Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video as we're going to discuss NBA free agency here for 2023. I'm going to give some of my predictions, where I think specific players could land. We have a pretty exhaustive list. Do not go over every single NBA free agent, but if you do have questions about a specific free agent that I do not discuss in this video, I would love for you guys to comment down below, ask me where I think he's going to ultimately land, and I will guess my best guess for that situation. Now, of course, this is all predictions, so is it possible I'm wrong? 100%. So if you disagree with me on something, let me know where you think a free agent is potentially going. I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts as well. And then if you are new to Utility Sports, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as well. And without further ado, let's jump into it with the first free agent I want to talk about, and that is Khris Middleton of the Milwaukee Bucks. Khris Middleton opted out of a player option north of $40 million a year, and you might think, wow, that's a lot of money to pass up if you're Khris Middleton, but when you think about it from a long-term perspective, Middleton hasn't had the best past couple of seasons, and I think there's been a little bit of benefit of the doubt with some of his injury stuff, and hey, we'll see Middleton get back to being Khris Middleton at some point. It's kind of the expectation around the league. But if he were to opt into that player option and have another down year, yes, he'd be $40 million richer, but his free agency period next offseason I think would be a little bit rougher if he had another down season. Whereas, hey, he's kind of got the benefit of the doubt right now. Opting out of that $40 million, yes, you're sacrificing that kind of security of a short one year, massive amount of money deal. But what you are doing as Khris Middleton is likely setting yourself up for a big 4-year number, maybe 4 years 120, maybe a little bit north of that. 4 years 140 I think is in play for Khris Middleton with the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm interested to see what his final number ends up coming in at. But as you can kind of tell from my discussion here, I don't really see Khris Middleton having a true quote-unquote free agency. I think he's essentially a Milwaukee Buck until proven otherwise. I'm expecting him to re-sign with Milwaukee. I think he's a big part of that organization. I think that they included him in their coaching search for new coach Adrian Griffin, and they picture him being there long-term next to Giannis Antetokounmpo. Of course, he was so pivotal for them in winning the NBA championship in 2021. That's just hard for me to see them kind of moving off of him, even in kind of a changing of the era off of Mike Budenholzer. I still think Khris Middleton is going to be an important piece for that organization going forward, and I do not expect him to switch sides. Then we go into Jerami Grant, another highly anticipated free agent. The Blazers traded for him from the Detroit Pistons about a year ago. In calendar year, it's been an interesting year for the Portland Trail Blazers, who had bigger expectations coming into this past season. Finished as the 13th seed, ended up moving up in the draft lottery, getting Scoot Henderson. They also drafted Kris Murray. So they've added two good young players. I think both of them are going to be ready to contribute right away. They also had an interesting round 2 selection in Ryan Rupert, who I like for them. But I still think that there's quite a bit of an essential need on the wing, specifically the forward spots, both 3 and the 4. And that's been kind of the big dilemma during Damian Lillard's tenure in Portland. You think about kind of the forward spots and have they been able to fill that up with good, strong, capable scoring, athletic wings? And the answer to that's really been no. Jerami Grant's probably one of the better wings that Damian Lillard's played with. And because of that, I think that the Portland Trail Blazers are going to really emphasize keeping Jerami Grant. I think he's going to be a big part of their offseason. Now, I do think that there is a potential pathway here to where they could theoretically sign and trade him to another organization to bring something else in. They have a decent amount of assets. They've got some young pieces. Anthony Simons is a movable player. They have ways to move around Jerami Grant if they wanted to in a sign and trade. Now, it's going to be difficult to do. I didn't see a clear landing spot. So because of those things, I ultimately don't see Jerami Grant moving somewhere else, which is why I landed on him back in Portland. But if one of those things were to come to fruition, say he gets signed and trade somewhere, it wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't be the most outlandish thing ever. Now, I think Portland's current priority would be to keep him in Portland, and I think that's a good priority. Now, it's important that they get him on the right price point. For me, if it's over $25-30 million a year, that's really expensive for Jerami Grant and the production he's going to give you, especially when you consider the fact that he's not a very good rebounding 4. And there's some flaws in his game. Now, he's a good player. He's a really important piece to Portland if they're trying to compete right now, which is what I think their current goal is, while having some of those young guys. So it'll be interesting to see what ultimately happens here with Portland and Jerami Grant, but I think he's going to be a lock currently for me to stay with the Blazers. Now we get into a very interesting free agent, one that I just don't think you would expect to have a lot of leverage in Draymond Green. But I think on the flip side, he actually has a ton of leverage, and it's because of a few recent moves and one trade specifically that the Sacramento Kings made, where they sent out Richaun Holmes and pick number 24 to the Dallas Mavericks. They now have room for essentially a max slot, and because of that, they could be a real risk to land Draymond Green. Now, I'm going to talk about the fit here for a second. First of all, why does it make sense from a personnel standpoint? And why do I think even Sacramento would consider Draymond Green, and why would Draymond consider Sacramento? First of all, Mike Brown has a very good lasting relationship with Draymond Green from his tenure as an assistant coach with the Warriors. He's definitely praised Draymond Green in the past as well. Think about him as a tempo pusher. The way Sacramento already likes to play fast, that's already a naturally pretty good fit. Now in the half court, things get a little clunkier because Sabonis, obviously a non-shooter, or I think hesitant shooter is the better way to put it. Draymond Green is a hesitant shooter and should be hesitant shooter. De'Aaron Fox is best when he's getting to the rim. So you're looking at probably playing with three guys who are better off scoring in the paint than they are out on the perimeter. Now Fox has taken massive steps forward in that regard. So it's not like you can say sag off of De'Aaron Fox. But when we're talking about how does this team play at its best offensively, it's about spacing around Sabonis and Fox. So that might already be a questionable fit just in the half-court offense for them. But then defensively, it does make a lot of sense because Sabonis is not a true defensive anchor. He's not going to hold down the paint for your team, block a ton of shots. Draymond Green is one of the better anchors in the NBA, and it's kind of surprising just with his size. You just don't expect a player at 6'7" to be a true anchor of a defense. It's exactly what he is. He's one of the best, most intuitive help defenders in the NBA, and I think because of that, the fit in Sacramento would actually make some decent sense. Now, do I actually expect him to go there? The answer to that is no. I think he's going to stay with the Golden State Warriors, but I think he's going to utilize the Sacramento Kings and that relationship with Mike Brown as leverage over Golden State to get a little bit of more financial backing out of Golden State in his next contract, and probably what will likely be his last true big contract in the NBA. I expect him to sign for a 4-year deal with pretty significant money still attached to it. And with the Jordan Poole trade, I think it does signify that Golden State has intentions of keeping Draymond Green. They opened up their money long-term by turning Poole into a short-term 1-year deal in Chris Paul. So they have the pathway here. They have the opening to ultimately make Draymond Green work in Golden State financially long-term. It's still going to cost them a ton of money. The luxury tax is going to be tight on them. But ultimately, Draymond Green still makes a lot of sense for the Warriors, and that's where I ultimately expect him to sign. So no movement yet from Middleton, Jerami Grant, or Draymond Green. But with the Kings not spending that money on Draymond Green, they still have, again, over $30 million in cap space. And Kyle Kuzma is a very interesting name to watch. The Washington Wizards, I think they would hope to turn him into a sign and trade, or to ultimately keep him so that they can trade him at a later date. However, I think that's going to be very difficult to do, given the fact that Sacramento not only has the money to sign him, but the positional need makes a lot of sense, assuming that they renounce Harrison Barnes. And you look at the fact that Monte McNair at one point tried to trade for Kyle Kuzma and actually had a reported deal agreed to basically with the Los Angeles Lakers, with Rob Pelinka, on what was Kuzma going to Sacramento in a deal centered around Buddy Hield for the Lakers. That deal ultimately ended up getting nixed by LA. They traded those pieces out to Washington for Russell Westbrook. Clearly not a great move for the Lakers, but now at this spot, Monte McNair finally gets the guy that he wanted for quite some time in Kyle Kuzma. And I think one thing about Monte McNair is he's looking at playmaking field. Kuzma can obviously put the ball in the deck for his position, passes fairly well. He's a good rebounding wing, and I think is a really good upgrade into this roster. I think he's a good long-term upgrade over Harrison Barnes. I think he fits the timeline of Fox and Sabonis a little bit smoother, still offers good size, length, defensive acumen. So I think ultimately Sacramento here gets their guy. I'm expecting them to spend a lot of money on him, probably north of $25 million a year, which isn't terrible for him, especially with the way that the contracts are nowadays. It sounds crazy to say that $25 million isn't a lot, but it really isn't anymore compared to where the max contracts are at for a lot of players. So Kuzma at 25 is something I can justify, and then it also gives them that remainder of their cap space, around $10 to $11 million, to renegotiate with Domantas Sabonis and then extend him off of that renegotiated contract. So that's a really important stepping stool here for the Kings too. We saw the Pacers do that with Miles Turner last year, where they used cap space to renegotiate and extend, and I think the Kings are going to do something similar here with Domantas Sabonis this offseason. So you might say, well, where does that leave Harrison Barnes, as the Sacramento Kings are likely going to renounce his rights? That's what every single indication I have right now is, that Harrison Barnes is out the door, and they have to figure out some way to, or Harrison Barnes' camp, has to find out some way to make it work. Make him go to a destination where he's going to have a role, where he's going to get touches, and where he's also going to have a chance at winning at some point relatively soon. I think the best place for that is not back in Dallas. I think it's in Indiana with the coach who coached him in Dallas, Rick Carlisle. I think the two of them have a very good lasting relationship. I think that Rick Carlisle would like to have Harrison Barnes back on his roster. He's a veteran. He's been in the postseason a few times in his career, of course. Was a part of some deep playoff runs for Golden State back in the day. And I think now when you're looking at Harrison Barnes and his fit into Indiana, it's interesting because they just drafted Jarris Walker, but I think giving them a veteran front court player who's a solid defensive piece, that's good. That's good for Indiana. They have cap space to go out and spend. You can probably get Harrison Barnes on somewhere around $15 to $17 million a year. You're not going to have to break the bank to get him. He's going to age fairly well because his game's not super predicated on athleticism, although he's a very athletic player. He's still got really good fundamentals, plays off of 2 feet, has a pretty good lasting skill set that I think is going to fit around the Pacers, and I think could become an intriguing long-term bench piece for them, although the first year I would expect him to start over Jarris Walker. Pacers fans might not be stoked about that, but ultimately that's what I see coming to fruition. Now going into perhaps one of the most discussed free agents, and it's one that a lot of people expect to sign for the mid-level exception, and that is Bruce Brown of the reigning champion Denver Nuggets, and he was super pivotal for that team. Obviously filled a really nice role, averaged double digits in points, 4.5 rebounds, just under 4 assists a game. So very versatile player. I was just shocked last year when he signed for the non-taxpayer, or for the taxpayer mid-level exception. This year it looks like he's lined up for the non-taxpayer mid-level, or potentially more. I did think about Indiana as a potential fit for him, but ultimately didn't land on that with Harrison Barnes going there in my predictions. So now for Bruce Brown, I have him going to the Minnesota Timberwolves. And if you look at what the Minnesota Timberwolves have done, I'm going to pull out a Brian Windhorst. What's going on in Minnesota? With Bruce Brown being a free agent, the Minnesota Timberwolves decided to waive Taurean Prince on his fully non-guaranteed deal. He was owed about $7.5 million. $0 was guaranteed. They waived him, and they ultimately gave themselves flexibility to get to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is at $12.4 million roughly. Because of that, they are now in a spot where they could go out and sign Bruce Brown. Now, is his market going to potentially be stronger? Could a team with cap space go out and offer him? The answers to that is yes. But I think if you're looking at Minnesota, a team that needs maturity, needs somebody who can play in a role, probably needs a secondary creator behind Mike Conley. I think like Bruce Brown really checks the boxes, like a perfect fit onto the roster. Now, I know people are going to look at the shooting and say, oh, how does Bruce Brown fit next to 2 bigs or 3 bigs with Naz Reid even? Ultimately for Minnesota, it's about getting maturity, defensive intelligence, someone who's tough, physical, and a smart player. And Bruce Brown checks all of those things, which is why I think, it's tough to move off of Taurean Prince, but if you're going to make a move like that where you feel at $7.5 million it's better to move off of Prince to open up, a pathway to something else, that something else might have to be really good. Now, could I see that being Dante DiVincenzo instead of Bruce Brown? Possibly. That's probably their backup option in case it's not Bruce Brown, but I think Bruce Brown is their primary target, their lead candidate, and the guy that they would love to have in the building. We'll see if Bruce Brown ultimately goes to Minnesota, but that's my current expectation. Now with Cam Johnson, another really intriguing name in this free agency, as he's a restricted free agent. The Brooklyn Nets acquired him at the trade deadline from the Phoenix Suns, so there's not a lot of long-lasting relationship there, which could potentially lead to him having a drawn-out free agency process where he meets with a few teams, some other team gives him an offer sheet, and then the Nets have a tough decision to make. And that's ultimately what I expect to happen, as my guess is the Detroit Pistons, who do have a relationship with him now after hiring head coach Monty Williams, I think that they're going to come in and give him a pretty intriguing offer. They have cap space. You look at their cap window, Cade Cunningham He's 3 years away from his rookie deal expiring still at this point. Jaden Ivey's 4 years away from his. You could comfortably sign Cam Johnson here to a 4-year deal with a ton of money, and it's not going to impact your long-term financial standing because some of your best players are on rookie deals and they're relatively fresh rookie deals. So you have some you have like a little bit of a gap here before you have to spend money on your current roster anyway. So going out and giving a huge offer sheet to Cam Johnson makes sense. And I think it could be anywhere from 4 years, $120 million or higher. And that's a lot of money to commit to a guy. That's $30 million a year for Cam Johnson. Is that an overpay? 110% it is. But I do think that when you look at Detroit, and again, that cap table, what else are they going to use their money on? They don't need to look at depth right now. They have a lot of youth pieces. They have a lot of guys that I think can fill roles for them. I look at a guy like Isaiah Livers. They just drafted Osar Thompson. We'll see what he ends up becoming. They've got a decent amount of just actual pieces on the roster. Of course, they've got like 82 big men, it feels like. For Detroit, it's about finding someone who is a good complementary fit, who understands the coach's system, can be kind of a nice mentor, veteran presence for them. And I know Cam Johnson, who's just coming off of his own rookie deal, you don't think of him as old, but he's into his late 20s almost at this point. You're going to have him through the entire duration of his prime on this next deal, and I think it's something that makes a good deal of sense for Detroit actually. Even on an overpay, you put Brooklyn in a really tough spot of, hey, can we really afford to match this $30 million a year contract for Cam Johnson, especially when Mikal Bridges is going to be doing a new contract relatively soon? The answer to that for Brooklyn is probably no, so I think he ends up in Detroit on a pretty rich number. Although if the Nets just say, look, we're not letting Cam Johnson walk, I could understand that too. And maybe the Nets do keep him, even if it is a long-term disadvantage for them for their cap table themselves. Now we get into a fun player here, Russell Westbrook of the Los Angeles Clippers, and I think it's very notable that the Clippers can only offer him about $3.8 million this offseason because they do not have bird rights on him since they picked him up after he was traded to the Utah Jazz and then bought out. So you look at Russ, their current situation with him, I think he would like to be back in LA. I think he likes living in LA. I think he likes playing with Kawhi Leonard. I know he loves playing with Paul George. The two of them are, of course, very, very close. But when it comes to Russell Westbrook and the money perspective of it, like, is the Clippers the right place for him? They ended up waiving Eric Gordon, freeing up a ton of money there, which I was kind of surprised by. I thought they were going to keep Eric Gordon and then use him as a tradable contract. They ultimately did not do that. But I do think Russ is going to get a pretty good offer, and I think it's going to be a team in Chicago. The Chicago Bulls give him, I think, a significant raise over what the Clippers can offer him. Now, I'm not thinking it's going to be anywhere crazy like $18-20 million, but I think it could be, $6 to $9 million, somewhere in that range. And because of that, the Bulls should be considered, in my opinion, the front runners to land Russell Westbrook. Another team I would have considered is the Washington Wizards, had they not kind of started their rebuild and retooling. I just don't think that makes sense at this point now. But you have that relationship with Billy Donovan, who coached him in Oklahoma City. He now goes to Chicago. Reunited with Billy Donovan, the Bulls badly need another offensive initiator, creator, someone who fits that fast style of play that they were operating under when they had Lonzo Ball healthy. I think it's a really good fit in terms of their actual roster construction. Russell Westbrook's on the same timeline as DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic, who they just signed to a 3-year, $60 million extension. You maybe don't like that. I know I don't like it, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to run it back. They're trying to be a good team. They're trying to be a playoff team, even if that means a first-round exit in 4 or 5 games. It seems like they don't care. They're going to commit to this current core, this current team, and Russell Westbrook is definitely a positive addition to a team that missed the playoffs this past year. I think Russ probably gets you significantly closer to at least being a first-round playoff team. Now we stick on to maybe even a more prevalent guard in Kyrie Irving. Of course, two of the most polarizing players in sports, Russell Westbrook, Kyrie Irving. Now Kyrie Irving, he's got a big decision ahead of him, and this is something I was a little worried of back in February when the Mavericks traded for him, is there's real flight risk here. The Lakers, of course, could pivot and make a move. At the time I'm recording this, we don't exactly know what's going to happen with Mo Bamba and Malik Beasley and their contracts currently, but they could theoretically let both of them go. They could waive Bamba. They could not pick up the team option on Beasley. And the Lakers could be positioned very, very well to make a run with cap space at Kyrie Irving by renouncing D'Angelo Russell. Now, the question is it worth doing that? Do you want to sacrifice 3 pieces for 1 when you're the Lakers and you already have seen what a lack of depth can do for your organization? That can be a pretty tough pill to swallow. But I do think Kyrie Irving would make the Lakers a lot better. Although I think that Kyrie Irving, similar to what we talked about with Draymond Green, is using the Lakers for leverage. I think he's going to stay in Dallas. I think he's ultimately going to continue to play with Luka Doncic for the foreseeable future. Now, the big question for me is how many years and what does the money look like on it? He's eligible for a huge extension with the organization, but I can't see them giving him max money, max years. I just don't see that being something that is advantageous for Dallas, given Kyrie Irving's history of not being available for an organization for various reasons. And I think because of that, Dallas has to be a little careful here. But if you can get him on slightly less than the max in terms of annual average value and slightly less than the max in terms of years, it positions Dallas decently well, and then it makes that trade a little bit more understandable from their perspective. It's going to be tough to ultimately get him to stay. I think there's going to be a challenge here of, okay, you can't undercut him completely on this offer, but if you give him, I think, a respectable offer, even if it's not max, you can probably walk out with him. Then let's turn to the Houston Rockets, who probably the biggest team to watch for this offseason. They have a ton of cap space at over $50 million in cap, and I think that they're going to use all of it. I think every single penny is going to get spent, and I see them spending on these three guys. I see them spending on Brook Lopez to become some sort of defensive anchor for them. We'll see what happens with Alperen Şengün then if he goes to the bench, or does Brook Lopez come off the bench? How does that minutes divide go? I think ultimately for Udoka, his emphasis is going to be on winning games, and I think Brook Lopez defensively is going to be a really good addition for them. The question is, how do the two of them play together, and do Alperen Şengün and Brook Lopez actually play together? Maybe that's an underexplored topic of discussion as well. And then you also look at Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks. To me, it seems like those two guys are guarantees at this point to be playing for the Houston Rockets. In my Discord, by the way, links in the description, you guys should go join that if you want to talk basketball with a lot of awesome people. But in there, I kind of joked about Fred VanVleet signing a 4-year, $140 million deal with the Houston Rockets, and I think if they sign him to that, it's going to be kind of a tough pill to swallow. Now, they have cap space, they have the ability to make it work, and maybe in that final year you can move him, or maybe there's some non-guaranteed money, whatever you want to talk about in that. For me, if I'm signing VanVleet, who, by the way, shot about 39% from the field this past year and like 33% from three, if I'm signing VanVleet, I'm not signing him for more than 2 years. If I'm the Houston Rockets. And for Dillon Brooks, I actually like Dillon Brooks a bit for Houston. Now, I don't think that they need another shot chucker, another high-volume shooter. That's what Brooks is. I think that there would be better options out there. But if you're looking to bring in defensive intensity, defensive toughness, and defensive playmaking, you're getting one of the best shot blockers in the NBA this way in Brook Lopez, who challenged the most shots in the NBA last year and did a really great job in that regard. Then you're getting someone who's always toward the top of the league in steals in Fred VanVleet. He gets his hands on the basketball, has very quick, active hands, quick feet as well to stay in front of guys. And then you're getting Dillon Brooks, who is a known defensive dog. He's somebody who takes pride in guarding the other team's best player. So if you're looking at the Houston Rockets, who on average have given up 120 points per game over the last 2 or 3 years, this Rockets team needs to get better defensively. I think Amen Thompson's a step in the right direction. I think he's going to be a really nice addition defensively. But this trio does give you a lot more defensive capability than what Houston currently possessed. So because of that, I could really see the Rockets making these moves, taking a big step forward, winning a significantly higher number of games next season. Now, does it mean I think that they're a title contender? Definitely not. And I think ultimately, the concern is going to be about stunting development of your young guys. For me, it's about putting young guys in good moments to play effective roles and play in meaningful basketball. The Rockets haven't had meaningful basketball for about 3 years now, since James Harden left. So you need to have that meaningful basketball, and I think these three veterans do help you get there. But for me, it's going to be really important what those annual values look like. How much are these guys getting paid per year, and how long are those contracts for? Because I think that is ultimately how I'm going to grade these deals. If they're all 2 or 3 year deals, I'm going to be okay with it for Houston. If they're all 4-year deals with pretty massive money being invested into these three, I'm not happy about it. So it's going to really come down to the length and, again, the money in those contracts. And there we are now with James Harden, one of the last players we're going to talk about in this video. James Harden, for me, I'd oftentimes talked about him going to Houston. At this point, I'm backing off of that claim. I just do think I was wrong about that whole situation. And I do think now with Houston hiring Ime Udoka, that completely changed the landscape of the situation, where James Harden going to Houston made less sense with what Udoka is hoping to build, which is a defensive identity for the organization and for the roster. Harden doesn't really fit that, so now where does Harden go? And I think there's going to be some situations, some destinations that could come up as potential options. I think the Los Angeles Clippers are a team to watch, which is very interesting. I think that the Milwaukee Bucks would be a team to theoretically watch. Now, I don't think that those are going to be the landing spots for him, to be clear. I ultimately expect him to stay in the city of brotherly love. I think he's going to continue to play for the Philadelphia 76ers long term, which I think is good for that organization. His playmaking combination on the short roll with Joel Embiid is the best duo in basketball when it comes to assist combinations. They are the most potent, most prolific duo in two-man actions in the NBA. And because of that, it's a really good infrastructure in place to start your team. And now with a new coach and Nick Nurse, you're hoping that you can build a good long-term defensive identity around those two guys long-term to sustain winning and at some point hopefully get out of the second round, which I think Philadelphia is going to be poised to do potentially this next season. We'll see what happens, but they have the talent, they have the roster to do it. It's just about the X's and O's and the coach putting these guys in positions to finally do it. Now, the last team we're going to talk about, the Phoenix Suns, and I don't really have any players I'm predicting for this team. All I'm predicting is a lot of minimum contracts, and the one prediction I have here, people, a lot of people were reacting to Bradley Beal saying, oh my gosh, they got him for basically nothing. The Wizards didn't get anything from Bradley Beal, and they're not looking at it from a contractual, team building, roster construction, CBA standpoint. Trust me, I've been reading the new CBA. It finally got released yesterday. I've been reading it. The Suns are screwed. The Suns are really royally screwed. They have basically no flexibility over the next 3 or 4 years unless they trade DeAndre Ayton, which is really the only thing to watch for from this Phoenix team, is if they can effectively engineer a campaign DeAndre Ayton trade where they end up sending those two guys out the door for about 3 or 4 good role players that fit their current team. They need size, they need shot blocking, they need rebounding, and they just need more defensive versatility. And it's going to be really hard to address all of those things with only about $37 million in tradable contracts. They're going to rely on a lot of two-way guys. They're going to rely on a lot of minimum guys. Like, literally, they were working out Jabari Parker and Stanley Johnson just the other day. This team is going to be thin, and they're going to be razor thin. And because of that, I don't see the Suns as real threats in the Western Conference. In fact, there's a bevy of teams I would pick ahead of them as true threats to win the NBA Finals next year. I think the Phoenix Suns really indexed hard on this current upcoming season. I think that they made a lot of mistakes along the way. I think Matt Ishbia might end up getting a new rule named after him, and ultimately the Suns, I think, are in a position where they're screwed long term, which I hate to say, but ultimately that's where I feel like the Phoenix Suns are headed. They are trying to build around Devin Booker, and they did it with a 34, about to turn 35-year-old Kevin Durant, and now a 30-year-old Bradley Beal. So good luck with that, Phoenix. They owe those three guys like a boatload of money over the next 4 years. It's going to be a very interesting test to how the new CBA is going to punish a team like Phoenix for spending big on 3 all-star level players. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like. Subscribe to the channel for more content as well. Don't want to miss out on any of the future uploads. I will be live during free agency. Make sure you guys stop in, tune into some of those live streams, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.